In 1977, in a small, simple hall, a nurse was sitting quietly, listening to a man preaching about the end of the world. This nurse was already struggling, depression, confusion, feeling lost. But something about his words hit her differently. After the sermon ended, this super charismatic man walked up to her, looked straight into her eyes, and said with full confidence, "I can take away your pain forever. All you have to do is quit your job, leave your family, and follow me into the Canadian wilderness." And she did. She left it all behind. But she wasn't the only one. Dozens of others did the same. And that's how one of the darkest and most violent cults in Canadian history was born, the so-called Ant Hill Kids. But before we dive deeper, let's rewind a little, back to the beginning of the cult's leader, Roch Thériault. He was born in 1947 in a small town called Saint-Epiphan in Quebec, one of 7 kids in a super strict Catholic family. His dad was a house painter, his mom ran the house with tough religious rules. Every Sunday, church was mandatory, no excuses. But little Roch wasn't like other kids. While the other boys ran outside to play after Mass, Roch stayed behind, buried in the Bible for hours. And he wasn't into the stories of mercy or forgiveness, no. He was obsessed with the wrath of God, the apocalyptic visions from Revelation, the destruction of the world. By age 13, he was convinced the end was near, and he believed he had a special knowledge no one else had. He dropped out after 7th grade, but his obsession with reading never stopped. He no longer saw himself as just a kid. He thought he was chosen. His family made things worse. His father was part of a radical group called the White Berets, a Catholic organization with fascist leanings. He took Roch door-to-door preaching, drilling into him the idea that he was a messenger of faith. In reality, it was the perfect breeding ground for an extremist mindset. By his 20s, Roch married a young woman named Françoise, and they had 2 kids. From the outside, he looked like a normal guy, husband, dad, worker. But behind closed doors, he was controlling every single detail of his wife's life. What she wore, how she spoke, how she acted. Rules changed constantly. One day he'd force her to dress modestly. The next he'd make her wear short skirts. The only constant was his total control. Then came a turning point. Roch developed a serious stomach ulcer and went through painful surgery. The pain pushed him to study medical books, and soon he convinced himself he was smarter than doctors. He claimed he could heal people with alternative methods. From that point on, he mixed religion with fake medicine, prophecies with miracle cures. He bounced around different churches, trying to spread his ideas. But every time, they kicked him out for being too weird, too extreme. But instead of quitting, Roch took rejection as proof. He was different. He was chosen. He needed to start his own group. In January 1977, he joined the Seventh-day Adventists. They pushed healthy living. No alcohol, no tobacco, no junk food. Roch didn't care about the rules. He saw them as tools to control people. And it worked. He stood out with his charisma and fiery preaching, making people believe he had some divine secret. Before long, a small group gathered around him, mostly women. That's when he started calling himself Moses. He claimed he was a prophet, sent to lead his chosen people to safety from the apocalypse he swore was coming on February 19, 1979. To prepare, he told his followers to quit their jobs, drop out of school, because, according to him, the future didn't matter. The end was coming soon. And with that, their journey into darkness had begun. When Roch convinced his followers that the end of the world was coming in February 1979, he had already planted one core idea in their minds. Their old lives meant nothing. No jobs, no studies, no family ties. All of it was worthless compared to what he called God's plan. And so, one by one, his followers started cutting ties. Some dropped out of college. Others quit their jobs. Many cut off their families completely. Slowly, they became an isolated group, loyal to one man only, the self-proclaimed New Moses. At first, Roch opened what looked like a small, natural health clinic. The concept was simple: healing through natural foods. Roch preached that organic diets and grape juice could cure any disease, even cancer. Desperate patients who felt hopeless with modern medicine came searching for a miracle. But in reality, the clinic was nothing more than a money trap and a way to recruit new followers. One shocking case was a woman named Geraldine Aller, who was battling leukemia. Her husband, desperate for any chance to save her, brought her to Roch's so-called clinic. Instead of chemotherapy, Roch told her to only drink grape juice, and he cut her off completely from her family. Her health collapsed fast, and soon she was dead. For any normal person, this would have been the end of Roch's lies, but not for him. Instead, he twisted her death into a so-called miracle. He told his followers that he kissed her forehead and she woke up for one last moment before God took her to heaven. And instead of exposing him, her death became proof of his divine connection. But the Seventh-day Adventist Church couldn't tolerate him anymore. In 1978, they officially expelled Roch and his entire group. For most people, that would have been the end. But for Roch, it was just another sign. Proof, he said, that he was right and all the other churches were corrupt. Meanwhile, his personal life was collapsing too. His wife, Giselle, was fed up with his endless affairs and relationships with the women in the cult. When she confronted him, his response was brutal. He locked her up and beat her until she gave in. At this point, nothing held him back anymore. No church, no wife, no law. And with money problems piling up, he decided to vanish from society altogether. In June 1978, Roch led his 16 followers deep into the Quebec wilderness. He declared that this was their holy land, Eternal Mountain, where they would live until Judgment Day. At first, they built rough tents, then log cabins. The dream was a self-sufficient community, but the reality? Harsh winters, barely any food, endless exhausting labor. And Roch? He refused to work alongside them. Instead, he stood back, watching as they toiled away. He compared them to ants, working tirelessly for the colony. And that's how they got their name, the Ant Hill Kids. But behind this innocent name was the start of something terrifying. At first, Roch lured his followers in with love. He made them feel special, like a chosen family, hand-picked by God. But little by little, everything changed. He started starving them on purpose. He controlled all the food, handing out tiny rations of lentils or stale bread. He kept them sleep-deprived, waking them up in the middle of the night just to give endless sermons. The hunger, the exhaustion, it was all a way to break their minds and stop them from thinking clearly. Then came his shocking announcement. All marriages in this group are invalid, except mine. From that moment on, every woman in the cult was considered his wife. He held his own twisted wedding ceremonies with each of them. And within just a few years, Roch had fathered more than 26 children from 9 different women. When February 19, 1979 finally came, and the world didn't end, some of the followers were confused. But Roch already had a backup plan. He told them that God's timeline is different from human time. The prophecy wasn't false, it was simply divinely delayed. And of course, no one dared to challenge him. The violence begins. Once Roch knew his grip on the group was solid, the cruelty came out. Anyone who complained or questioned him faced brutal punishments. One follower was forced to smash his own leg with a hammer. Another was ordered to sit directly on a lit stove. Some had their fingers cut off with pliers as a test of loyalty. Even the children weren't safe. He hung them from trees and made other kids throw stones at them. One baby was left outside in the freezing cold until he died because his mother would rather see him go that way than suffer at the hands of the prophet. And it didn't stop there. Roch became obsessed with doing his own surgeries. He'd cut people open with kitchen knives, pour alcohol into the wounds, and claim he was healing them. In reality, they were nothing more than torture sessions disguised as medicine. The death of little Samuel. In 1981, tragedy struck, and for the first time, the cult's dark secrets began to surface. A 2-year-old boy named Samuel cried during the night, annoying one of the cult members, a man named Guy Veer. Out of rage, Guy beat the toddler until he fell into a coma. Instead of rushing him to a hospital, Roch claimed the boy needed to be circumcised. On a kitchen table, using crude tools, Roch performed a horrific operation on the unconscious child. By morning, Samuel was dead. This time, Roch couldn't just hide the disaster. But even then, he twisted the truth. He staged a fake trial for Guy Veer, the man who had beaten the child. Roch then convinced him that the proper punishment was castration, and under intense psychological pressure, Guy actually agreed. Not long after, Guy escaped the camp. He went straight to the police. When authorities finally raided the compound, the scene was pure horror. Starving, skinny children, broken-down shacks, terrified followers who barely dared to speak. The kids were immediately taken into foster care. Roch and several of his followers were arrested. But here's the shocking part. The punishment was barely anything. Roch was convicted of criminal negligence, not murder. The result? Just 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. After 2 years in prison, Roch Thériault walked free in 1984. Most people thought jail would weaken his grip, that his followers would finally wake up. But shockingly, his children were waiting for him right outside the prison gates, as if nothing had happened. They had already lost most of their kids to foster care. They had no money, no future, yet they still believed. To them, Moses was still their prophet. Their salvation depended on him. The return. Roch wasted no time. He led his followers to a remote area near Burnt River, Ontario. There, they built new cabins and tried to revive the so-called perfect community he had promised them. But this time, things were much, much worse. Roch had come back with a new addiction: alcohol. The same man who once preached purity and holiness was now a violent drunk. And since they were completely broke, he forced his followers to steal. He even stitched secret pockets into their clothes so they could sneak food and tools out of stores. Even the kids were dragged into his schemes. Absolute control. Day by day, Roch turned into a full-blown dictator. He banned his followers from talking to each other unless he was present. He spied on them constantly, barging into their cabins to scream that God had revealed their sins to him. The punishments grew more terrifying. Fingers and toes crushed with pliers. Followers forced to beat each other until they collapsed. Hanging from trees for days. Alcohol poured into open wounds. But the scariest of all was what Roch called his surgical treatments. Any follower who complained of pain, no matter how small, ended up on his kitchen table. He shoved tubes into their bodies. He stabbed them with knives, punched them in the stomach, ripped at his insides with his bare hands. And all the while, he claimed he was casting out demons or curing infections. Broken by fear and trauma, many of his followers truly believed he had supernatural powers. The tragedy of Solange. In 1988, one of his wives, Solange Boillard, complained of stomach pain. For Roch, it was the perfect chance to show off his skills. He strapped her to the kitchen table and ordered everyone to help in what he called surgery. First, he forced an enema on her. Then he punched her in the stomach over and over. He shoved a tube down her throat and made his followers blow air into it. And finally, with a kitchen knife, he sliced her abdomen open. With his bare hands, he pulled out parts of her intestines while she was still conscious, screaming in agony. This wasn't medicine, it was torture. The next day, Solange was dead. But even in death, Roch didn't let her rest. He ordered her buried, then days later dug her body back up. He performed a bizarre resurrection ritual, washing her with vinegar, pouring olive oil on her body, chanting nonsense words. Of course, nothing happened. Solange was gone, and the cult sank deeper into madness. Another victim, Gabrielle. Months later, in 1989, another loyal follower, Gabrielle Lalonde, complained of pain in her hand. Roch's response? He stabbed her palm straight through with a knife, pinning her hand to the table. He left her bleeding for hours. Then he declared the only cure was amputation. In front of everyone, he cut off her entire arm. But this time, Gabrielle didn't break. Summoning every ounce of strength, she escaped the camp while still bleeding. She reached a hospital and finally told doctors and police everything she had endured. Thanks to Gabrielle's testimony, a massive investigation began. Police raided the compound, but Roch had already fled with some of his followers. For 6 long weeks, he was on the run. Finally, he was captured in Quebec. The trial. The courtroom was stunned. Gabrielle stood before the judges and told everything: the torture, the beatings, the so-called surgeries. Her words sent chills through everyone listening. Roch was found guilty of murdering Solange, of amputating Gabrielle's arm, and of countless other acts of cruelty. His sentence? Life in prison with no chance of parole. Behind bars. Even in prison, Roch didn't stop pretending to be a prophet. He wrote bizarre letters, painted strange pictures, even tried selling them through online auctions. Shockingly, some women from the outside world kept writing to him as if his twisted charm still lingered. But on February 26, 2011, the real end finally came. His cellmate, a man named Matthew MacDonald, had had enough of Roch's non-stop preaching. That morning, he fashioned a crude weapon and slashed Roch across the neck. Then, calmly, he walked up to a guard, handed him the weapon, and said, "I've finished him. That's the knife, and you'll find the body inside." Just like that, the so-called prophet was dead. And with him, the nightmare of the Anthill Kids was officially over. But the questions still haunt us today. How could one man gain such control over dozens of educated adults? How could people abandon their families, their own reason, and endure such horror in the name of salvation? The truth is, evil doesn't show up all at once. Roch didn't ask his followers on day one to break their own bones or to sacrifice their children. He started small, giving their lives meaning, convincing them they were chosen. Then came the isolation, the hunger, the slow erosion of free thought. Step by step, obedience turned into slavery. Loyalty turned into self-destruction. And that's the terrifying lesson in this story. We're not as immune as we like to believe.